20 children, 10 already dead, the rest dying in the heat. Ethan Cole found them by accident, locked in a wagon that shouldn't exist, abandoned in a desert where nothing survives. No horses, no tracks, no explanation, just the smell of death and the sound of children too weak to cry. This wasn't negligence, this was murder, slow and deliberate. And when 3 men arrived claiming those children as cargo, Ethan faced a choice that would define everything: walk away and live, or stand alone and probably die. This is the story of what happened when one man refused to turn his back. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's begin. The desert didn't forgive mistakes. Ethan Cole had learned that truth over 15 years of hauling freight across the territories, 15 years of watching men die from thirst, heat, or simple stupidity. He'd seen wagons stripped to bones, horses collapsed mid-stride, entire camps swallowed by dust storms that erased them from existence. The desert was honest in its cruelty. It didn't lie, it didn't pretend. It simply took what you gave it and returned nothing. That's why the wagon bothered him. It sat alone in Dry Basin, maybe 300 yards below the ridge where Ethan had stopped to rest his horse. The basin stretched flat and lifeless in every direction, a pan of cracked earth and scattered creosote that nothing crossed without purpose. There were no settlements for 40 miles, no water, no reason for anything with wheels to be down there. But there it was. A covered freight wagon, stationary and tilted, its canvas sun-bleached to the color of old bone. No horses in the traces. No supplies stacked nearby. No camp, no fire ring, no sign that anyone had ever meant to stop there at all. Ethan pulled his hat lower against the glare and studied the scene. His horse, a gray gelding named Ash, shifted beneath him, nostrils flaring at something on the wind. The animal didn't like it, neither did Ethan. Smart men didn't investigate mysteries in the desert. Smart men kept moving. Ethan urged Ash forward anyway. The descent into the basin took 20 minutes, the slope gradual but treacherous with loose shale that clicked and scattered under Ash's hooves. The temperature climbed with every foot of elevation they lost. By the time they reached the basin floor, Ethan's shirt was soaked through, his mouth dry as paper despite the water he'd rationed that morning. The wagon looked worse up close. The rear axle had snapped clean through, dropping the back end into the dirt at an angle that would have made it impossible to move even with a team. The wheels were intact but weathered, spokes bleached gray, iron rims flaking rust. The canvas cover was lashed tight, no gaps, no tears. Whoever had secured it had done so carefully. Too carefully. Ethan dismounted, boots crunching on the hard pan. Ash whinnied softly, ears pinned back. Ethan looped the reins over a wagon spoke and approached the rear gate. The smell hit him first. It came through the canvas, faint but unmistakable. The sweet, rotting thickness of death mixed with something sharper. Urine, sweat, human waste. Ethan's stomach turned. He'd smelled it before, in field hospitals during the war, in towns ravaged by fever. It was the smell of bodies failing, of life leaking away in the heat. He reached for the canvas ties. His hands moved mechanically, fingers loosening the knots even as his mind screamed at him to stop, to mount Ash and ride hard in any direction that led away. The last tie came free. Ethan pulled the canvas aside. Sunlight poured into the wagon bed, and Ethan saw them. Children. 20 of them, maybe more, packed into a space meant for cargo. Small bodies pressed together in the shadows, some sitting, some slumped, some lying motionless on the wooden floor. Their faces were streaked with dirt and dried tears. Their clothes, simple cotton dresses, threadbare shirts, patched trousers, hung loose on frames too thin, too fragile. Some stared at him with hollow eyes that didn't blink. Others didn't move at all. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. A girl near the back shifted slightly, her lips cracked and bleeding. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her hand lifted an inch off the floor, fingers trembling, then fell still. Ethan's training took over. He climbed into the wagon, knees hitting the boards, and moved toward the nearest child, a boy, maybe 8 years old, curled on his side. Ethan pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. He moved to the next. A girl with blonde hair matted to her skull. No pulse. The next. A boy with a birthmark on his cheek. Gone. The next. The next. The next. 10 children. All dead. Some had been gone for days, their skin waxy and discolored. Others were more recent, still warm to the touch. Ethan's hand shook as he moved through them, checking each one, hoping for something different, finding only stillness. The living ones watched him with expressions that held no hope, no fear, nothing but exhausted acceptance. They'd stopped expecting rescue. They'd stopped expecting anything. Ethan forced himself to breathe. "Who did this?" he said, his voice rough. "Who put you here?" A boy near the front, maybe 10 years old, dark hair, sharp eyes, despite the dehydration, spoke in a voice like dry leaves. "The man," he said. "Families. He said we were going to families." "What man?" The boy's throat worked, trying to swallow. "Tall. Talks like church. Smiles all the time." Another child, a girl with red hair, added weakly, "He locked us in, said it was for safety, said someone would come." "When?" Ethan demanded. "When did he lock you in?" The boy's eyes drifted, unfocused. "Don't know. Long time. Days." Ethan's jaw clenched. Days. Locked in a wagon in the desert in the middle of summer with no water, no food, no ventilation. This wasn't abandonment. This was execution. He backed out of the wagon and dropped to the ground, his legs unsteady. Ash stamped nervously, pulling against the reins. Ethan walked a few steps away, hands on his knees, and fought the urge to vomit. He'd seen terrible things in his life. He'd seen men gutted in battle, seen women and children starve during sieges, seen whole towns erased by disease. But this was different. This was deliberate. Someone had gathered these children, promised them something better, and then sealed them in a coffin on wheels to die slowly under the sun. Ethan straightened, wiping his mouth. His mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. 40 miles to the nearest town, Salvation Ridge, a supply hub north of the basin. With Ash, he could make it in maybe 6 hours if he pushed hard, but that meant leaving the children. The living ones wouldn't last 6 hours. Hell, some of them wouldn't last one. He could stay, try to keep them alive with what little water he had. But he only carried 2 canteens, maybe 3 days' worth for himself. Split among 10 survivors, it would buy them an hour, maybe 2. And then what? They'd all die together, just slower. Or he could try to move them, rig something, use the wagon parts, drag them somehow. But the axle was broken, Ash couldn't pull that weight, and the nearest water source was 20 miles east, a spring that ran dry half the year. Every choice led to death. Ethan walked back to the wagon. The children's eyes followed him, flat and glassy. They knew. They understood the math as well as he did. "Listen to me," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm going to help you. I don't know how yet, but I'm not leaving you here." The boy with dark hair blinked slowly. "You should go," he said, "before they come back." "Who's they?" "The men. They come sometimes, check on us." Ethan's blood went cold. When was the last time? The boy's face scrunched, thinking. "Yesterday. Maybe. Hard to tell." Ethan scanned the horizon. Empty in every direction, heat shimmer rising off the basin floor like water. If someone was watching this place, they'd see him from miles away. He was already exposed. No choice now. He was in it. He moved back to Ash and pulled both canteens from the saddle, along with a canvas tarp he used for makeshift shelter. The sun was already vicious, climbing toward noon, and it would only get worse. First priority, shade. Second, water. Third, remove the dead. The thought made him sick, but it had to be done. The bodies would accelerate the deterioration of the living ones, both physically and mentally. Ethan spread the tarp from the wagon's side to the ground, angling it to create a triangle of shadow. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then he climbed back into the wagon. "Can any of you move?" he asked. 3 children shifted, 2 boys and a girl. The rest stayed motionless, either too weak or unconscious. "All right, I'm going to help you out, one at a time. We're going to get you into the shade." He started with the girl, maybe 7 years old, her arm covered in blisters from where the sun had found a gap in the canvas. She weighed almost nothing, bones and skin, and not much else. Ethan carried her out and set her gently on the tarp, then went back for the next. It took 30 minutes to move all 10 living children. By the time he finished, his shirt was drenched, his shoulders screaming, his throat raw from breathing the superheated air. The children lay in the shade, some curled together, others separate, all silent. Ethan opened the first canteen and knelt beside the nearest child, the boy with dark hair. "Small sips," he said, "just enough to wet your mouth." The boy drank like a man dying of thirst, because he was. Ethan had to pull the canteen away after 3 swallows. "Easy, too much, and you'll be sick." He moved down the line, giving each child the same careful ration. The water disappeared faster than he'd hoped. By the time he reached the last one, a tiny girl with black hair and skin so pale it looked translucent, the first canteen was empty. 1 canteen left, maybe 20 swallows total. Ethan capped it and set it aside. Then he turned back to the wagon. The dead had to be moved. He worked in silence, lifting each small body and carrying it away from the wagon, laying them in a row on the hard pan. His mind went blank as he did it, refusing to process what his hands were doing. 10 children, 10 lives that had ended badly, alone, terrified. When it was done, Ethan stood over the row and removed his hat. He wasn't a religious man, hadn't been since the war, but the moment demanded something. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner." The wind picked up, scattering dust across the bodies. Ethan replaced his hat and walked back to the living. The boy with dark hair was watching him. "You can't save us," he said. "Maybe not," Ethan replied, "but I'm going to try." "Why?" Ethan crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes. "Because someone should have tried before. Because this shouldn't have happened. And because if I walk away, I'm no different than the man who locked you in there." The boy's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, something small and fragile that might have been hope. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Samuel." "All right, Samuel, I need you to tell me everything. Who brought you here? How many men? Where were you before this?" Samuel's voice was faint, but he pushed through. "We were at the orphanage, in Redstone. A man came, said he worked for families out west, said they wanted children. Good homes, real homes. How many of you were there?" 22. 2 got sick before we left. The rest of us, he put us in the wagon, said it was a long trip, but we'd be safe. And then? We rode for days. He stopped sometimes, gave us water, bread. Then we got here and he said we had to wait. Said the families were coming soon. Samuel's jaw tightened. He locked the wagon, left us. Came back once, maybe twice. Didn't open it, just checked the lock and left again. Ethan's hands curled into fists. This man, what did he look like? Tall, thin, always wore black like a preacher, had a nice voice, made you want to trust him. Anyone with him? 2 others. Didn't talk much, just watched us. 3 men, armed probably. And if they'd been checking the wagon, they'd be back. Ethan stood, scanning the basin again. Still empty. But that wouldn't last. He had maybe hours before someone showed up. Hours to figure out a plan that didn't exist. The sun climbed higher, pressing down like a hammer. The children lay in the shade, breathing shallow, their bodies starting to shut down. Ethan rationed out another round of water, smaller sips this time, stretching what remained in the second canteen. A girl with red hair, one of the ones who'd spoken earlier, tugged weakly at his sleeve. Are we going to die? Ethan looked at her, this child who'd been lied to, betrayed, left to rot in the heat. He wanted to tell her no. He wanted to promise she'd be fine. But he'd never lied to make someone feel better, and he wasn't going to start now. I don't know, he said. But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you don't. She nodded slowly, accepting the honesty, and closed her eyes. Ethan stood and walked to the edge of the shade, staring out at the empty basin. 40 miles to Salvation Ridge. No horse could carry 10 children. No man could walk them that far. Not in this heat. Not in their condition. He was trapped. They were all trapped. And somewhere out there, the men who'd done this were coming back. Ethan checked his revolver, a Colt .45 he'd carried since the war. 6 rounds. He had a rifle in his saddle, a Winchester with maybe 10 more in the stock. 16 bullets against 3 men, maybe more. Not great odds, but he'd survived worse. The afternoon dragged on, the heat reaching brutal levels that turned the air thick and hard to breathe. Ethan kept the children hydrated as best he could, used his own shirt to wipe the sweat from their faces, whispered reassurances he didn't believe himself. One of the younger boys, maybe 6, with a mop of brown hair, stopped breathing around 3 o'clock. Ethan tried to revive him, pressing on his chest, breathing into his mouth, but it was too late. The boy's body had simply given out. Ethan carried him to the row of dead and added him to the line. 11 now. 9 left. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, Ash suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward. Ethan turned, hand moving instinctively to his revolver. Riders, 3 of them, coming from the north, still distant but closing fast. They moved with purpose, not the wandering pace of travelers. They knew exactly where they were going. Ethan's pulse quickened. He moved to the children. "Stay quiet," he said. "Don't say anything unless I tell you to." Samuel met his eyes. "They're going to kill you." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe I kill them first." He positioned himself between the wagon and the approaching riders, hand resting on his revolver, watching as the 3 figures took shape through the heat shimmer. The lead rider was tall and thin, dressed in black despite the heat, exactly as Samuel had described. He sat his horse like a man completely at ease, a slight smile on his face as he reined in 30 feet from Ethan. The other 2 flanked him, hard men with sun-scorched faces and rifles resting across their saddles. The man in black tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, friend," he said, his voice smooth and warm, like a preacher addressing his congregation. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here." Ethan didn't move. "Funny. I could say the same." The man's smile widened. "Name's Silas Mercer. These are my associates, Mr. Dalton and Mr. Pike. We're here on church business, transporting unfortunate souls to new homes." His eyes flicked to the children in the shade. "I see you've found our charges." "Your charges," Ethan repeated flatly. "That's right, orphans from Redstone. We're delivering them to families up north." Mercer gestured to the wagon. "Had some trouble with the axle, as you can see. Been waiting for a replacement." "In a locked wagon, in the middle of the desert, with no water." Mercer's expression didn't change. "A necessary precaution, I'm afraid. Children can be unpredictable. Wander off, get lost. Safer to keep them secure until we're ready to move." Ethan's jaw tightened. 11 of them are dead. "A tragedy," Mercer said, shaking his head sadly. "The heat, you understand. We did what we could, but the Lord works in mysterious ways. The Lord didn't lock them in that wagon. You did." The 2 men flanking Mercer shifted, hands moving closer to their weapons. Mercer raised a hand, stopping them. "I can see you're upset," Mercer said calmly, "and I appreciate your concern for these children. Truly, I do. But this is a private matter, contracted and paid for. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and let us handle things from here." "No." Mercer's smile faded slightly. "I'm sorry? I said no." Ethan's voice was flat, final. "These children aren't cargo. They're not going anywhere with you." "Friend, I don't think you understand this situation." "I understand fine," Ethan interrupted. "You're running some kind of operation, selling kids or worse. You left them here to die because it was easier than dealing with them. And now I'm standing in your way." Mercer's eyes hardened, the preacher facade cracking. "That's a dangerous position to take." "I've been in worse." Silence stretched across the basin, broken only by the wind and the labored breathing of the children. The 2 men with Mercer watched Ethan with the flat, calculating stares of men who'd killed before and would again without hesitation. Mercer leaned forward in his saddle. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice losing its warmth. "Those children are property. Legal property, signed over by the orphanage to my organization. You're interfering with a legitimate transaction." "There's nothing legitimate about leaving kids to die in a locked wagon." "Your interpretation," Mercer said. The law might see it differently, especially when I explain how a drifter attacked us while we were conducting our business. That the story you're going with? It's the story that'll be believed. Mercer straightened. Now, you seem like a practical man, so I'm going to make you an offer. You ride out of here, forget what you saw, and we forget you were ever here. Walk away. Live to see another day. Ethan's hand remained on his revolver. And if I don't? Mercer's smile returned, cold and empty. Then Mr. Dalton and Mr. Pike will put you in the ground next to those children, and no one will ever know you existed. Behind Ethan, one of the children whimpered. Samuel's voice, barely audible. Please don't. Ethan didn't turn around. He kept his eyes locked on Mercer, reading the man's body language, the subtle tells that would come before violence. Here's my counteroffer, Ethan said quietly. You turn those horses around and ride out. Leave the children. I'll get them to Salvation Ridge, tell the authorities what happened. You'll have a head start. Might even make it to Mexico before they catch up. Mercer laughed, a sound without humor. You're serious? Dead serious. One man, against three, with 9 dying children to protect. Mercer shook his head. That's not bravery, friend. That's suicide. Maybe, Ethan said, but I've made my choice. Question is, have you made yours? The moment hung suspended, the desert holding its breath. Ethan's fingers rested on his revolver's grip, every muscle coiled, ready. Mercer's eyes calculated, weighing options, measuring risk. Then something changed in Mercer's expression, a hardness settling in, a decision made. Mr. Dalton, Mercer said softly. Mr. Pike, I believe this gentleman needs a lesson in practicality. The 2 men raised their rifles, and Ethan drew. Ethan's revolver cleared leather in a fraction of a second, the Colt coming up smooth and fast, muscle memory from 1,000 draws overriding conscious thought. The first shot cracked across the basin before Dalton's rifle reached his shoulder, the bullet punching through the man's upper chest and spinning him sideways off his horse. Pike was faster. His rifle barked, the round hissing past Ethan's ear close enough to feel the heat. Ethan dove left, hit the ground rolling, came up firing. His second shot caught Pike in the shoulder, the impact jerking the man backward, but not dropping him. Pike's horse reared, screaming, and Pike fought to control the animal with one hand while trying to bring his rifle around with the other. Ethan fired again. This time Pike went down hard, tumbling from the saddle and hitting the ground in a cloud of dust. 3 seconds. 2 men down. Ethan swung his aim toward Mercer, but the man in black had already wheeled his horse around, spurring hard toward the ridge. Ethan tracked him, finger tightening on the trigger, then stopped. Mercer was already 200 yards out and opening the distance fast. At that range, on a moving target, with a handgun, the shot was pure luck. Ethan lowered the Colt, breathing hard, ears ringing from the gunfire. Behind him, the children were silent, frozen in shock. Ash had bolted during the shooting, reins trailing, and was now standing 50 yards away, sides heaving. Ethan checked Dalton first. The man lay on his back, eyes staring at nothing, a spreading pool of red soaking into the dirt beneath him. Dead. Pike was still breathing, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. The rifle shot had shattered his collarbone. He'd live, but he wasn't going anywhere. Ethan kicked Pike's rifle away, then moved to collect the other weapons. 2 Winchesters, a shotgun from Dalton's saddle, and a revolver from each man. He dumped them in a pile near the wagon, then returned to Pike. The man glared up at him through pain-glazed eyes. You're dead, he rasped. Mercer will come back. He'll bring others. You're dead. Maybe, Ethan said, but right now you're the one bleeding. He pulled Pike to a sitting position against the wagon wheel, drawing a grunt of pain from the man. Pike's shoulder was a mess, bone fragments visible through the torn flesh. Ethan had seen worse wounds, but not many that didn't kill eventually from infection. Where were you taking them? Ethan asked. Pike spat blood. Go to hell. Ethan crouched down, meeting the man's eyes. You're going to bleed out in a few hours if that wound isn't treated. I can help you, or I can leave you here to die slow. Your choice. Where were you taking the children? Pike's face twisted with pain and calculation. Finally, he spoke. Rail station. 3 days west. Man named Culligan runs it. He pays for orphans. $50 a head. Pays for what? Whatever he wants. Labor. Worse things. Pike's mouth twisted into something like a smile. You think you saved them? You just delayed it. There's always another buyer. Always another deal. Ethan's jaw clenched. How many times have you done this? Enough. Orphanages are full of kids nobody wants. Easy pickings. Mercer talks pretty, signs papers, and we haul them out. Clean, legal, profitable. Nothing about this is legal. Pike laughed, a wet, painful sound. Legal's whatever the law says it is. And out here, there ain't no law, just money and guns. And you're on the wrong side of both. Ethan stood, looking down at the wounded man. Pike was probably right about Mercer coming back. The man had run, but he wouldn't run far. Not with money on the line and witnesses to eliminate. Ethan had maybe hours, possibly less, before this situation got worse. He walked back to the children. They stared at him with wide eyes, some frightened, some awed, all confused. Samuel was the only one who looked unsurprised. Is he dead? Samuel asked, nodding toward Dalton. Yes. Good. The word was delivered without emotion, just a simple statement of fact. Ethan knelt beside the boy. Listen to me. That man who rode away? He's going to come back, probably with more men. We can't be here when that happens. We can't walk, Samuel said. Most of us can barely sit up. I know. Ethan's mind raced through options, discarding each one as fast as it formed. The horses, Dalton's and Pike's mounts had bolted during the gunfight, disappeared somewhere into the basin. That left Ash, who could carry maybe 2 children if pushed. The wagon was useless with the broken axle. Walking was suicide. Unless... Ethan stood and moved to the wagon, examining it more carefully. The rear axle was snapped, but the front was intact. The wheels still turned. If he could separate the front section from the back, reduce the weight, maybe fashion some kind of sledge or travois. He pulled his knife and started cutting away the canvas, exposing the wagon's frame. The bed was constructed in 2 sections, bolted together at the middle. With the right leverage, he could potentially remove the rear half entirely, leaving just the front section attached to the wheels and tongue. It would be lighter. Not light, but lighter. Ethan worked fast, using tools from Dalton's saddlebags. A wrench, a pry bar, a hammer. The bolts were rusted and stubborn, fighting him every turn, but he forced them loose one by one. Sweat poured down his face, his hands cramping, his back screaming, but he kept going. Samuel watched him work. What are you building? Something to pull you, Ethan grunted, leveraging the pry bar against a particularly stubborn bolt. Can't carry everyone, can't leave you, so we improvise. Improvise means guess, right? Pretty much. That's not encouraging. Ethan almost smiled. The kid had spirit, even half dead from dehydration. You got a better idea, I'm listening. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then, the man, Mercer. He talked about a relay station, said it was on the way to the rail stop, maybe 20 miles south. Ethan paused, considering. A relay station meant water, possibly supplies, maybe even people. 20 miles was better than 40. Still impossible with dying children, but less impossible. You remember anything else about it? Just that it was near something called Broken Mesa. He pointed when he said it. South. Ethan oriented himself, trying to recall the landscape from his mental map of the territory. Broken Mesa was a rock formation, distinctive, visible for miles. He'd passed it once, years ago, hauling supplies to a mining camp. If there was a relay station there, it would be small, probably just a water stop for stages. But it would have what they needed. 20 miles, with makeshift transport, in desert heat, with 9 children barely clinging to life. It was still suicide, just slower. The last bolt came free, and Ethan pried the rear section of the wagon away from the front. The whole back half, frame, wheels, broken axle, separated and crashed to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. What remained was the front third of the wagon bed, maybe 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, still attached to the tongue and front wheels. Ethan dragged it away from the wreckage and examined his work. It was crude, unbalanced, but it would roll. He could harness Ash to the tongue, load the children onto the bed, and pull them. Slow, brutal work for the horse, but possible. He spent the next hour reinforcing the bed with canvas and rope, creating a padded surface that wouldn't shake the children to pieces. He salvaged what he could from the rest of the wagon: extra rope, a tarp, a few tools. Then he caught Ash and brought the reluctant horse back, rigging a harness from leather straps and rope. The sun was dropping toward the horizon by the time he finished, the temperature finally starting to break. Ethan moved the children one by one onto the makeshift sledge, arranging them as carefully as possible. 9 bodies, some conscious, some not, all too light, too fragile. The girl with red hair, her name was Emma, he'd learned, looked up at him with fever-bright eyes. "Are we really leaving?" "We're really leaving," Ethan confirmed. "What about him?" She nodded toward Pike, still slumped against the wagon wheel, pale and sweating. Ethan walked over to the wounded man. Pike's breathing had turned shallow, his eyes glassy. The blood loss was catching up to him. "I'm leaving you water," Ethan said, setting one of the captured canteens beside Pike. "And a gun." He placed Pike's revolver within reach. "You want to wait for Mercer? That's your business. You want to end it yourself? That's also your business. But I'm not taking you with us." Pike's lips moved, forming words that barely made sound. "You won't make it." "Probably not," Ethan agreed. "But I'm going to try." He turned away, ignoring whatever Pike said next, and moved back to the sledge. Samuel was watching him with an expression that was hard to read. "You gave him a gun," Samuel said. "I did." "He could shoot you." "He could try." Ethan checked the sledge one more time, making sure the children were secure. "But I don't think he will. Man like that, he's done. He knows it." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen that look before. In the war. In men who'd taken a wound they couldn't come back from. They get a kind of peace about it. Acceptance." Ethan glanced back at Pike. "He's just waiting now." Samuel absorbed this in silence. Then, "You were in the war?" "I was." "Which side?" Ethan met the boy's eyes. "Does it matter?" "No," Samuel said after a moment. "I guess it doesn't." Ethan gathered the reins and started to lead Ash forward. The sledge jerked, wheels catching in the hardpan, then rolled forward with a grinding sound that made Ethan wince. Ash pulled gamely, the horse's muscles bunching under the load, but the animal was already tired, already worked. This was going to be brutal. They moved south, following the direction Samuel had indicated, leaving the wreckage of the wagon behind. Ethan walked beside Ash, one hand on the reins, constantly watching the children for signs of distress. Every 50 yards he stopped to check on them, to adjust someone who'd shifted, to give tiny sips of water. The water situation was desperate. Between what he'd started with and what he'd taken from Dalton and Pike, he had maybe 4 canteens total. Rationed carefully, that might last 2 days. But 20 miles across open desert would take longer than 2 days, especially with stops, with the weight, with the heat. They'd have to find water. Had to. The sun touched the western horizon, bleeding red across the sky. The temperature dropped slowly, mercifully, though the ground still radiated heat like a cook stove. Ethan kept them moving, knowing that stopping meant stiffening up, meant giving doubt time to take root. Darkness came fast in the desert. One moment there was light, the next there were just stars and the pale glow of a rising moon. Ethan continued on, navigating by the moon and the dark shape of broken mesa visible against the southern sky. Around midnight, one of the children started crying, a soft, broken sound that cut through the night. Ethan stopped and moved to the sledge. It was a small boy, maybe 5 years old, curled into a ball and shaking. "Hey," Ethan said gently, kneeling beside him. "What's wrong?" "Hurts," the boy whimpered. "Everything hurts." Ethan had no medicine, no way to ease the pain except distraction. "What's your name?" "Thomas." "All right, Thomas. I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that?" The boy's crying didn't stop, but he nodded slightly. Emma, lying next to Thomas, reached over and took his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're going to be okay." Ethan didn't know if she believed it, but Thomas seemed to calm slightly at her touch. Children comforting children in the darkness, holding on to each other because there was nothing else to hold on to. Ethan stood and kept walking. The hours blurred together. Walk, stop, check the children, give water, keep moving. Ethan's feet became mechanical, his body operating on pure stubbornness. Ash plodded along, head low, every step an effort. The sledge wheels ground against rock and hardpan, the sound like bones breaking. Dawn came slow and gray, revealing a landscape of scrub and stone. Broken Mesa was closer now, maybe 5 miles ahead, a flat-topped rock formation rising from the desert floor like a broken tooth. Ethan could see it clearly in the early light, and somewhere near its base, supposedly, was the relay station. If it still existed, if it had water, if they could reach it. Ethan stopped to rest as the sun climbed. They'd covered maybe 8 miles through the night, 12 more to go. At this pace, that meant another full day and night, possibly longer. He checked the children. 2 had slipped into unconsciousness during the march. Their breathing was shallow, irregular. Emma was still awake, barely, her lips cracked and bleeding despite the water. Samuel sat propped against the side of the sledge, watching the horizon with those sharp old eyes. "How far?" Samuel asked. "Maybe 12 miles. That's far." "Yes. Some of us aren't going to make it, are we?" Ethan wanted to lie, to offer false hope, but Samuel deserved better. "Probably not." The boy nodded, accepting this. "Which ones?" Ethan looked at the unconscious children. "Hard to say. The body's a strange thing. Sometimes the ones you think are strongest go first. Sometimes the weak ones surprise you. Will I make it?" "You're talking, you're thinking, you're still fighting. That's good." Ethan met his eyes. "But I need you to keep fighting. No giving up. Understood?" "What if I want to give up?" "Then you push through it anyway, because the only other option is dying out here, and I didn't shoot 2 men so you could quit on me now." Samuel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You're mean." "I'm honest." "Same thing sometimes." They rested for an hour, Ethan dozing in short bursts, never fully sleeping, always listening for the sound of approaching horses. Mercer was out there somewhere. The man had run, but men like that didn't run far. They regrouped. They came back. When Ethan woke from one of his brief dozes, he noticed one of the children, a girl with black hair, the pale one, had stopped breathing. He checked for a pulse, found nothing. She'd slipped away quietly, without struggle, her body simply giving out. 12 now, 8 left. Ethan lifted her gently and carried her a short distance from the sledge, laying her in the shade of a creosote bush. He had no tools to dig, no time to bury her properly. The best he could do was cover her with rocks, a small cairn to mark her passing. Samuel watched from the sledge. What was her name? Ethan realized he didn't know. He'd never asked. I don't know. That's sad. Dying without someone knowing your name. Yes, Ethan agreed quietly. Yes, it is. He returned to the sledge and got them moving again. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and oppressive. Ethan's water ran out around noon. He gave the last of it to the children and continued on, his throat burning, his lips cracking, his head starting to pound. Dehydration set in fast. Within an hour, Ethan's thoughts began to drift, reality blurring at the edges. He kept walking because stopping meant death. The sledge kept rolling because Ash kept pulling. Everything else became distant, dreamlike. He thought about the war, about men he'd known, friends he'd buried, about a promise he'd made to himself after Appomattox to never stand by while people suffered, to never be the man who looked away. He'd broken that promise more times than he could count. Small moments, small failures. Seeing injustice and moving on because it wasn't his problem, wasn't his fight. But not this time. This time he'd stay. This time he'd fight, even if it killed him. The sun reached its peak and started its descent. Broken Mesa filled the southern horizon, close enough now to see details, the striations in the rock, the shadows of crevices. Ethan's vision swam, the formation seeming to move, to breathe. He stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. Behind him, on the sledge, one of the children started singing, a thin, wavering voice, the words unclear but the melody recognizable. Some hymn or folk song, something about home. Other voices joined in, weak and off-key, but together. Ethan focused on that sound, let it pull him forward. Around 4 in the afternoon, Samuel called out, "There, I see it!" Ethan looked up, blinking against the glare. At first he saw nothing, just more desert, more rock. Then his eyes focused and he spotted it. A cluster of buildings at the base of Broken Mesa, maybe a mile ahead. Small structures, weathered wood, a corral, the relay station. Ethan's pace quickened, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. Ash sensed it too, the horse picking up speed, pulling harder. The children on the sledge stirred, those still conscious lifting their heads to look. The station grew larger as they approached. 3 buildings total, a main structure with a porch, a smaller building that looked like a stable, and a water tower. The water tower made Ethan's heart pound. Water. They just needed to reach it. They were 100 yards out when Ethan saw movement on the porch. A figure stood, backlit by the setting sun. Then another figure emerged, and another. 4 men total, all armed, all watching the approaching sledge with interest. Ethan's hand moved to his revolver, but his fingers were clumsy, uncoordinated from dehydration. He forced himself to focus, to assess the situation. The men on the porch made no aggressive moves. They simply stood, waiting. Ethan pulled Ash to a stop 50 feet from the building. "We need water," he called out, his voice cracking. "Children are dying." One of the men, older, gray-bearded, wearing a vest despite the heat, stepped forward. "We can see that. Question is, what happened?" Ethan's mind raced, trying to form coherent thoughts through the fog of exhaustion. These men could be help. They could also be part of Mercer's operation. The relay station was supposedly on the route to Culligan's rail stop. That suggested a connection, but the children needed water, now. Whatever risk came with these men was secondary to that immediate need. "We were attacked," Ethan said, keeping it vague. "Wagon broke down. These kids were left to die. I'm trying to get them to Salvation Ridge." The gray-bearded man studied Ethan for a long moment, then glanced at his companions. Some silent communication passed between them. Finally, he nodded. "Bring them inside," he said. "We'll get them water, food, whatever they need." Ethan didn't move. "Why? Why what? Why help us?" The man's expression hardened slightly. "Because I'm not a monster. Now bring those children inside before they die on my doorstep." Ethan hesitated one more moment, then led Ash forward. The men on the porch moved aside, creating space. Ethan guided the sledge right up to the steps, then started lifting children down, carrying them one by one into the building. The interior was simple, a large room with a fireplace, a few tables, some bunks along the wall. It was blessedly cool compared to outside, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the heat. The gray-bearded man directed Ethan to lay the children on the bunks, while one of the other men pumped water from a hand pump in the corner. Water flowed into a bucket, clear and cold. Ethan grabbed a ladle and brought it to the nearest child's lips, supporting her head as she drank. The water spilled down her chin, but some made it into her mouth. She swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. Ethan moved to the next child, then the next, giving each one water with shaking hands. The gray-bearded man helped, moving efficiently, checking pulses, assessing conditions with practiced ease. "You a doctor?" Ethan asked. "Was, long time ago, field surgeon in the war. These days I just run this station." He looked up from examining Emma. "Name's Garrett Hayes. This is my place." "Ethan Cole." Hayes nodded, then returned his attention to Emma. Her breathing had improved with the water, her eyes focusing better. "She'll make it," Hayes said. "Most of them will now that they've got water. But they need rest, food, proper care." "2 of them are unconscious," Ethan said, gesturing to the bunks where the unresponsive children lay. Hayes moved to check them, his expression grave. He spent several minutes working, checking vitals, trying to rouse them. Finally, he stood and shook his head. "One's gone already, the other—" He trailed off. "Maybe an hour, maybe less. Body's too far gone." Ethan closed his eyes, grief and exhaustion washing over him. 13. 7 left. He'd brought them this far, and still they were dying. "You did what you could," Hayes said quietly. "More than most would have, but you can't save everyone." "Doesn't make it hurt less." "No, it doesn't." Hayes gave instructions to his men. Bring food, blankets, anything to make the children comfortable. They moved quickly, efficiently, and Ethan realized these were good men. Whatever connection this station had to Mercer's operation, these men weren't part of it. Ethan collapsed into a chair, his body finally giving out now that the immediate crisis had passed. Hayes brought him water, and Ethan drank it down in great gulps, feeling the liquid work through his system like medicine. "Now," Hayes said, settling into a chair across from Ethan, "you want to tell me what really happened?" Ethan met his eyes. "How much do you know about a man named Silas Mercer?" Hayes's expression darkened. "Enough. He's used this station as a waypoint. Brings orphans through, says he's transporting them to families. I never liked it, never trusted him, but he had papers, contracts, everything looked legal. It's not legal. He's selling them. Rail station 3 days west to a man named Culligan." Hayes's jaw tightened. "I suspected as much, but suspecting and knowing are different things." He leaned forward. "What happened?" Ethan told him everything. Finding the wagon, the dead children, the confrontation with Mercer. Hayes listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. When Ethan finished, Hayes sat back, processing. "You killed Dalton?" "Yes." "And Pike?" "Left him wounded, maybe dead by now." "And Mercer ran?" "Yes." Hayes was quiet for a moment, then, "He'll come back. Men like Mercer don't leave loose ends, and you're a loose end, big one." "I know." "These children are loose ends too." "I know that too." Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the desert bathed in orange sunset light. "How many men you think he'll bring?" "As many as he can gather. 5, maybe 10. We've got 4 here, counting you, not great odds." "I'm not asking you to fight," Ethan said. "This isn't your battle." Hayes turned, meeting his eyes. "Those children are in my station. That makes it my battle." He gestured to his men. "They feel the same. We've all got reasons to hate men like Mercer, men who prey on the weak." One of Hayes's men, a younger fellow with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "I was an orphan once, lived through things no kid should. If Mercer's doing what you say, I want him stopped." The others nodded agreement. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't alone. For the first time since finding that wagon, he wasn't alone. "All right," Hayes said, his voice taking on a military precision. "If we're doing this, we do it smart. Mercer knows this station, knows the layout. We need to use that against him." They spent the next hour planning, preparing. Hayes's men checked weapons, reinforced the doors and windows, positioned supplies. The station became a fortress, crude but defensible. As night fell, Samuel found Ethan sitting on the porch, watching the darkness. The boy sat down beside him, quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," Samuel finally said. Ethan glanced at him. "For what?" "For not leaving us. For killing those men. For caring. Someone should have cared before it got this far." "But they didn't. You did." Samuel's voice was steady, mature beyond his years. "That matters." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. They sat together in silence, watching the stars emerge. Somewhere out there, Mercer was gathering men, preparing to come back. Somewhere out there, death was riding toward them. But right now, in this moment, 7 children were alive who shouldn't be. 7 children who had a chance. And Ethan would fight to give them that chance, whatever it cost. The night deepened. Inside the station, Hayes posted guards at the windows. The children slept, their breathing steadier now, their bodies beginning to heal. And Ethan waited for what morning would bring, knowing it would bring blood and violence and a reckoning long overdue. The attack came with the dawn, exactly as Ethan had expected. He'd been awake for hours, sitting near the window with his Winchester across his knees, watching the horizon slowly emerge from darkness. The desert transformed in stages, first black, then gray, then pale blue as the sun prepared to break. Hayes stood at another window, equally vigilant, while his men rotated guard positions throughout the night. The children slept fitfully on the bunks, their small bodies finally getting the rest they desperately needed. One more had died during the night, a boy named Jacob who'd simply stopped breathing around 3 in the morning. Hayes had moved him to a back room, covering him with a blanket, adding another name to the list of those who hadn't made it. 6 children left. 6 lives depending on what happened in the next few hours. Ethan spotted the riders when they were still a mile out, dark shapes moving against the lightning sky. He counted them carefully. 7 horses, 7 men. Mercer had brought reinforcements, just as predicted. "They're coming," Ethan called softly. Hayes moved to his position, peering through the gap they'd left in the shuttered window. 7. That's more than I hoped. But fewer than I feared, Ethan replied. Could be worse. The younger man with the scar, his name was Martin, checked his rifle nervously. Could be better too. Always could be, Hayes said. But we work with what we've got. Remember the plan. Let them get close. Wait for my signal. And for the love of everything, don't shoot unless you've got a clear target. We don't have ammunition to waste. The riders approached slowly, cautiously, spreading out as they neared the station. They weren't charging in blindly. Mercer was being smart, careful, treating this like what it was, a tactical assault on a defended position. Ethan recognized Mercer in the center of the group, still dressed in black, sitting his horse like a man completely in control. The other riders looked like hired guns, hard men with weathered faces and cold eyes, the kind who killed for money and asked no questions. They stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Mercer nudged his horse forward a few more steps, then called out in that smooth preacher voice, "Mr. Cole, I know you're in there. I can see your horse in the corral, and I know Mr. Hayes is with you. I recognize his men's mounts as well." Hayes muttered a curse. "Observant bastard." Mercer continued, "I'm prepared to make this simple. Send out the children and we'll leave peacefully. No one else needs to die. You've made your point, shown your courage. Now let's all be reasonable adults about this." Ethan stayed silent, letting Mercer talk. "Come now," Mercer called after a pause. "Surely you realize your position is untenable. You're outnumbered, surrounded. The children need medical care, proper facilities. I can provide that. Fighting serves no one's interests. Except yours," Ethan called back. "You need them dead or disappeared. Can't have witnesses to what you've done." Mercer's voice hardened slightly, the friendly veneer cracking. "What I've done is provide opportunities to unwanted children. What I've done is create value from waste. The world is full of orphans, Mr. Cole. No one misses them. No one cares." "I care," Ethan said simply. "One man's conscience against the realities of commerce. How noble. How ultimately pointless." Mercer gestured to his men. "I have 7 guns. You have, what, 4? Maybe 5? The mathematics are clear." Hayes leaned close to Ethan. He's stalling, trying to position his men while he talks. Ethan had noticed the same thing. While Mercer held their attention, the other riders were slowly spreading out, creating a perimeter around the station. In a few minutes, they'd have the building surrounded, able to fire from multiple angles. "We need to break this up," Ethan said, "before they get set." Hayes nodded. "On your word." Ethan raised his voice. "Mercer, you want these children? Come take them. But you'll have to go through us first." Mercer's smile was visible even at this distance. "If you insist." He raised his hand, preparing to signal the attack. Ethan fired first. The Winchester cracked, the bullet kicking up dust 2 feet in front of Mercer's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing Mercer, and the other horses scattered in panic. The neat perimeter collapsed into chaos as riders fought to control their mounts. Hayes and his men opened up immediately, their rifles barking in rapid succession. They weren't aiming to kill yet, just to disrupt, to keep the attackers off balance and away from cover. Bullets whined through the air, punching into the dirt, forcing the riders back. One of Mercer's men went down. His horse shot out from under him. The man hit the ground hard and scrambled for cover behind a boulder. Another rider wheeled away, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. But the others recovered quickly, professional fighters responding to ambush with trained efficiency. They scattered to predetermined positions, behind rocks, into a shallow wash, using terrain Mercer must have scouted beforehand. Within seconds, they'd transformed from a clustered target into a distributed threat. Return fire slammed into the station, bullets punching through shutters and thudding into walls. Ethan ducked as a round splintered the window frame inches from his head. Behind him, one of the children cried out in fear. "Stay down!" Hayes shouted to the kids. "Get on the floor, away from the windows!" Samuel was already moving, pulling the younger children off the bunks and into the center of the room, creating a barrier of mattresses around them. Emma helped, her face pale but determined, showing a courage that made Ethan's chest tighten. The gunfire intensified. Mercer's men had found their rhythm, laying down suppressing fire while others maneuvered for better angles. A window on the east side shattered, glass exploding inward. Martin returned fire through the opening, driving back whoever had targeted it. Hayes grabbed Ethan's arm. The water tower. 2 of them are moving toward it. If they get up there, they'll have a clear shot down into the station. Ethan swung his rifle toward the tower, a wooden structure 20 yards from the main building. He spotted movement, 2 men running low, using the building as cover from the other defenders. Ethan led the first man by half a step and fired. The bullet caught him in the leg, spinning him around and dropping him. The second man dove behind the tower's support legs. "I'll keep him pinned," Ethan said. "You watch the other approaches." For the next 20 minutes, the battle settled into a grinding stalemate. Mercer's men couldn't advance without exposing themselves to the defenders' fire. But the defenders couldn't leave the station without being cut down. Both sides traded shots, probing for weaknesses, trying to force a mistake. Ammunition became the first concern. Ethan had started with maybe 50 rounds total between his revolver and rifle. He'd already burned through half of that. Hayes and his men weren't much better off. At this rate, they'd be shooting rocks within the hour. "We need to change the equation," Hayes said during a brief lull. "Force them to commit or withdraw." "How?" Martin asked, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. "We're stuck in here." Ethan's mind raced through options. They needed something unexpected, something that would break Mercer's tactical advantage. His eyes fell on the stable, a separate building connected to the main station by a covered walkway. Inside were supplies, tools, hay for the horses, and lamp oil. "Hayes," Ethan said slowly, "how much oil you got stored in the stable?" Hayes followed his gaze, understanding dawning. 3 barrels. For the lamps and... oh. A grim smile crossed his face. That could work. "What could work?" Martin asked. "Fire," Ethan said. "If we can get oil to their positions, light it up, we force them to move. Out in the open, we've got better odds." "That's insane," Martin protested. "The wind could blow it back on us, could burn the whole station." "Could," Hayes agreed. "But sitting here waiting to run out of bullets is definitely going to get us killed. At least this gives us a chance." He looked at Ethan. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "The wash," Ethan confirmed. 3 of them are dug in there. It's downhill from here, runs east to west. We pour oil from the tower's high side, let it flow down into the wash, then light it. "Turn their cover into a trap," Hayes said. "I like it. But someone's got to get to that tower. Someone's got to haul the oil. And someone's got to light it under fire." "I'll go," Ethan said. "Like hell you will," Hayes countered. "This is my station. I'll go. You're the only one here with medical training. These kids need you alive. I'm expendable." "Nobody here is expendable," Hayes said firmly. Then he paused, reconsidering. "But you're right about the medical training." "Damn it!" He looked at Martin. "You and I will provide covering fire. Cole, you get to the stable, grab 1 barrel of oil, get it to the tower. Can you do it?" Ethan checked his revolver, ensuring a full cylinder. "I can do it." "Then move fast. We'll only be able to suppress them for about 30 seconds before they adjust." Ethan took a breath, centering himself the way he'd learned in the war. Fear was useful, kept you sharp, but panic got you killed. He visualized the route, out the back door, across 20 feet of open ground to the covered walkway, through to the stable, grabbed the barrel, back through the walkway, 15 feet to the water tower, up the ladder. 45 seconds if everything went perfect. A minute if it didn't. "On my mark," Hayes said, positioning himself at the window. Martin took the east window, rifle ready. Hayes's other 2 men, quiet fellows Ethan had barely spoken to, moved to provide crossfire. 3, Hayes counted. 2, 1, mark. All 4 defenders opened fire simultaneously, a coordinated volley that forced Mercer's men to duck and cover. Ethan bolted for the back door, yanked it open, and ran. The distance to the covered walkway felt like miles. Bullets whined past him, one so close he felt the air displacement. He hit the walkway at full sprint, his boots pounding on wooden planks, and burst into the stable. The oil barrels sat against the far wall. Ethan grabbed the nearest one, a 40-pound weight that made his shoulders scream as he hefted it. He turned, started back toward the walkway, and saw movement in the doorway. One of Mercer's men had flanked around, following Ethan's route. The man raised his pistol, a smile on his face, and Ethan knew he was too slow, too burdened, too dead. Samuel appeared behind the man like a ghost, swinging a wooden plank with all the strength his small body could muster. The plank connected with the back of the man's skull with a solid crack. The man staggered, his shot going wild, and Samuel hit him again. The man went down hard. Ethan stared at the boy, who stood there breathing hard, the plank still gripped in both hands. "Go!" Samuel shouted. "I'll watch the door!" There was no time to argue. Ethan ran back through the walkway, the barrel sloshing, oil leaking from the seams. He burst into the open and sprinted for the water tower. Bullets tracked him, kicking up dirt, punching through the barrel, and releasing sprays of oil. Ethan reached the tower's base and started climbing the ladder one-handed, the barrel clutched against his chest. Each rung was agony, his muscles burning, his grip slipping on the oil-slicked metal. But he climbed, fueled by desperation and the knowledge that stopping meant death. He reached the platform at the top, a narrow walkway circling the water tank. From here, he could see the entire battlefield. Mercer's men in their positions, Hayes and his men in the station, the wash running like a scar across the desert floor. Ethan tipped the barrel over the platform's edge, aiming for the high point above the wash. Oil glugged out, thick and dark, splashing onto the rocks and running downhill exactly as planned. It flowed into the wash, pooling around the positions where 3 of Mercer's men sheltered. The men noticed too late. They scrambled to move as the oil spread, but the wash's walls were steep, the bottom slick with the spreading liquid. Ethan pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against the tower's rough wood, and dropped it. The oil caught with a whoosh that Ethan felt as much as heard. Flames raced down the slope and into the wash, following the oil's path, engulfing everything in their path. The 3 men in the wash screamed and ran, their clothes catching fire, their positions abandoned. Hayes's men cut them down as they emerged, showing no mercy. The fire burned hot and fast, consuming the oil and creating a wall of smoke that obscured half the battlefield. Mercer's remaining men, 3 now, including Mercer himself, pulled back, regrouping behind a cluster of boulders 100 yards out. Ethan climbed down from the tower, his hands shaking from adrenaline. He made it back to the station, where Hayes clapped him on the shoulder. "Damn fine work, Cole." "Samuel saved me," Ethan said. "Took down one of them with a plank?" Hayes's eyebrows rose. "That kid's got steel in him." Samuel stood near the back door, still holding the plank, looking simultaneously proud and terrified. Ethan walked over and gently took the plank from the boy's hands. "You shouldn't have done that," Ethan said quietly. "Could have gotten killed." "So could you," Samuel replied. "Fair's fair." Ethan couldn't argue with that logic. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. The wash still burned, smoke rising in a black column visible for miles. 3 of Mercer's men were dead or dying. 1 was wounded at the base of the tower. That left 3, Mercer and 2 others. Hayes studied the remaining positions through his rifle's sights. "They're pinned, can't advance through the fire, can't flank without crossing open ground. Mercer's got to be calculating his options." "He'll try to negotiate," Ethan predicted. "Offer a deal, buy time while he figures out his next move." As if on cue, Mercer's voice carried across the battlefield. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Hayes, I believe we've reached an impasse. Perhaps we should discuss terms." "Nothing to discuss," Hayes shouted back. "Throw down your weapons and surrender. That's the only term we're offering." Mercer's laugh was bitter. "You know I can't do that. The children have seen too much. They can identify me, testify against me. I can't let them leave here." "Then you're going to die here," Ethan said, "because we're not giving them up." A long silence followed. Ethan could almost hear Mercer thinking, weighing his dwindling options. The man was trapped by his own crimes, backed into a corner by witnesses he couldn't afford to leave alive. When Mercer spoke again, his voice had changed, harder, colder, the preacher facade completely gone. "You're forcing my hand, gentlemen. I didn't want it to come to this, but you leave me no choice." Movement caught Ethan's attention. One of Mercer's remaining men was circling wide, trying to reach the corral where the horses were kept. If they spooked the animals, destroyed the water supply, they could turn the siege around. "Martin," Hayes snapped. "That rider heading for the corral. Drop him." Martin fired, but his shot went wide. The rider reached the corral and started cutting the fence rails. Horses whinnied and scattered, ash among them, the animals bolting into the desert. "Damn it," Hayes cursed. "There goes our mobility." Ethan tracked the rider with his Winchester, waiting for a clear shot. The man finished destroying the fence and turned toward the water tower, pulling something from his saddlebag. A torch. He was going to try to burn them out. Ethan fired. The bullet caught the man in the chest, dropping him instantly. The torch fell from his hands, landing in the dirt and sputtering out. Two left, just Mercer and one other man. The realization seemed to hit Mercer at the same moment. Ethan saw the man's posture change, saw him turn and speak urgently to his last companion. They were finished, and they knew it. Hayes saw it too. "They're going to run, both of them." "Let the other one go," Ethan said. "But Mercer doesn't leave. He's the head of this thing. Cut off the head, the body dies." Hayes nodded grimly. "Agreed." They waited, weapons ready. Sure enough, Mercer's last man broke cover and ran for his horse, mounting in one smooth motion and spurring away to the east. Hayes tracked him, but didn't fire, letting him go. Mercer stood alone behind the boulder, the morning sun now fully risen, illuminating him in harsh light. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, no weapon drawn. "Mr. Cole," he called, "I'm unarmed. I'm coming forward to speak with you, man to man. Surely you'll grant me that courtesy." Ethan glanced at Hayes, who shrugged. "Your call." Ethan stepped out of the station onto the porch, rifle lowered but ready. "Stop there," he said when Mercer had closed half the distance. "That's close enough." Mercer stopped, raising his hand slightly. Up close, Ethan could see the man more clearly. Handsome features, intelligent eyes, the kind of face people instinctively trusted. No wonder he'd been successful at this sick trade. "You've won," Mercer said simply. "My men are dead or scattered. The children are safe. You've accomplished what you set out to do." "Then why are you still here?" Ethan asked. "Because I want you to understand something. What I did for practical reasons. The world is full of unwanted children. I found a way to give them value, to make their existence profitable. Is that really so terrible?" "You murdered them," Ethan said flatly. "You locked them in a wagon and left them to die." "A miscalculation," Mercer admitted. "Pike was supposed to monitor them more carefully. His failure, not mine." "You're the one who gave the orders." "I'm a businessman, Mr. Cole. I identify opportunities and exploit them. If not me, someone else would fill this need. The demand exists. I simply met it." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. "You're trying to justify it, make it sound reasonable. But there's no version of this where you're not a monster." Mercer's expression hardened. "And what are you? A killer. You've murdered 5 men today. How is that different?" "I killed to protect the innocent. You killed for profit." "Semantics. We're both killers, Mr. Cole. The only difference is you've convinced yourself you're righteous." Behind Ethan, the station door opened, small footsteps on the porch. Ethan didn't turn, didn't take his eyes off Mercer, but he knew who it was. Samuel walked past Ethan, stopped at the top of the porch steps, and stared at Mercer with those sharp old eyes. The boy was silent for a long moment, just looking at the man who'd betrayed him, who'd promised him a family and delivered death. "Why did you lie to us?" Samuel finally asked, his voice quiet but clear. Mercer's smooth facade cracked. For the first time he looked uncomfortable, unable to meet the boy's gaze. "Why?" Samuel repeated. "We trusted you. We believed you when you said families wanted us. We got in that wagon because you promised us something better. Why did you lie?" Mercer opened his mouth, closed it. Whatever words he'd been preparing, justifications, rationalizations, business explanations, they all died in the face of that simple question from a child he'd tried to kill. Mercer started, then stopped. His hands fell to his sides. The confidence that had carried him through everything up to this point crumbled. I don't have an answer you'd accept. Try, Samuel said. Mercer looked at the boy for a long moment. Then, slowly, he shook his head. Because it was profitable. Because orphans are invisible. Because I could. He took a shaky breath. And because somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as people. You became cargo, inventory, numbers on a ledger. When did that happen? Samuel asked. I don't know, years ago maybe. So gradually I didn't notice until it was too late to turn back. Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing this. My sister died in that wagon. Her name was Margaret. She was 6 years old. She liked flowers and singing, and she died because you stopped seeing her as a person. Mercer's face twisted with something that might have been remorse. I'm sorry. No, you're not, Samuel said without anger, just stating fact. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry your business is finished. But you're not sorry about Margaret. You don't even remember her. Mercer had no response to that. Samuel turned and walked back into the station, leaving Mercer standing alone in the morning light. Ethan raised his rifle, aiming at Mercer's chest. His finger rested on the trigger. One shot, one squeeze. Justice for 22 children, 11 of them dead, the rest scarred forever. Do it, Mercer said quietly. It would be cleaner than what's waiting for me otherwise. Ethan's finger tightened, then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. No, he said. You're going to face what you've done. You're going to stand trial, testify, name every person involved in this operation. You're going to spend the rest of your life knowing what you became. That's not mercy, Mercer said. I know. Hayes emerged from the station with rope, and together they bound Mercer's hands. The man didn't resist, all the fight gone out of him. Whatever had broken during his conversation with Samuel had stayed broken. As they secured him to a post on the porch, hoofbeats sounded from the north. Ethan turned, hand moving to his revolver, then relaxed when he saw the riders. A sheriff's badge glinting on the lead man's vest, a posse of 6 following behind. The sheriff reined in and dismounted, taking in the scene, the burning wash, the dead bodies, the bound prisoner, the frightened children peering from the station windows. Name Sheriff Tom Bridger, the man said, his voice gravelly from years of dust and shouting. We saw the smoke from Salvation Ridge, figured trouble. What happened here? Hayes stepped forward. Long story, Sheriff. Short version is that man there, he pointed at Mercer, has been kidnapping orphans and selling them. Mr. Cole here stopped him. We've got 6 children inside who need medical attention and protection. Bridger's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. And we've got bodies to prove it, Ethan said. He gave Bridger a condensed version of events, starting with the wagon in Dry Basin and ending with the shootout. Bridger listened, his expression growing darker. When Ethan finished, the sheriff walked over to Mercer. Silas Mercer, Bridger said slowly. I've heard your name. Always wondered about your operation, how you move so many orphans so fast. Now I know. Mercer said nothing. Bridger turned back to Ethan. You've done a hard thing here, son. Harder than most men could manage. The law will want statements from everyone, but that can wait. Right now, let's get these children somewhere safe. The posse spent the next hour securing the area, tending to the wounded, and preparing to transport everyone back to Salvation Ridge. Hayes worked on the children, assessing their conditions, administering what care he could with his limited supplies. Ethan sat on the porch steps, exhaustion finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had kept him going. His hands trembled slightly, the weight of everything he'd done settling on his shoulders. He'd killed 5 men in the last 2 days, saved 6 children, lost 13 others. The numbers didn't balance. They never would. Samuel sat down beside him, the boy moving stiffly, his body showing the toll of their ordeal. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sheriff's men work. What happens now? Samuel asked. Sheriff takes you to Salvation Ridge. Real doctors will look at you, make sure you're healing properly. Then they'll find you homes. Real ones this time. What about you? I go back to hauling freight, I guess. Back to my life. Samuel considered this. Will you forget about us? Ethan looked at the boy, at this child who'd shown more courage than most soldiers Ethan had known. No, he said honestly. I don't think I could, even if I wanted to. Good, Samuel said. Because I won't forget you either. None of us will. Emma joined them on the steps, along with two other children, Thomas, the small boy who'd cried during the march, and a girl named Claire. They gathered around Ethan, these survivors, these children who'd been to hell and somehow made it back. You gave us a chance, Emma said softly, when no one else would. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the night's coolness. Sheriff Bridger approached, his face grave. We found the bodies, he said, from the wagon, and we found Pike dead where you left him. That makes 13 children total. Who didn't survive? 14, Ethan corrected. One died last night here at the station. Bridger removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. 14 children. Christ, this is going to be national news. Papers will run it for weeks. Good, Hayes said, joining them. Maybe it'll wake people up to what's happening in these orphanages, how vulnerable these kids are. Maybe, Bridger agreed, and Mercer's going to talk. He'll give up names, locations, everyone involved. We can shut this whole operation down. What about the man who was buying them? Ethan asked. Culligan, at the rail station. We'll get him, Bridger promised, and anyone else Mercer names. This ends now. As they prepared to leave, Ethan walked over to where Mercer sat, still bound to the post. The man looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence and charisma completely evaporated. Those children in there, Ethan said quietly, they're going to live full lives. They're going to grow up, have families of their own, tell their children and grandchildren about what happened. And your name will be remembered as the monster in their story, the man they survived. That's your legacy now. Mercer looked up at him, and for a moment Ethan saw something human in those eyes. Regret, maybe, or shame. But it was gone quickly, replaced by empty resignation. I know, Mercer said. Ethan turned away and didn't look back. The journey to Salvation Ridge took the rest of the day. The sheriff's posse had brought a proper wagon, and the children rode in relative comfort, cushioned by blankets and attended by Hayes. Ethan rode alongside on a horse Bridger had provided, his body aching from wounds he hadn't even noticed acquiring during the fight. They reached Salvation Ridge as the sun set, the town's lights appearing like stars against the darkening desert. The whole population seemed to turn out, drawn by news of the shootout and the rescued children. A doctor took charge immediately, ushering the kids into his office, while the town's women brought food, water, and concerned questions. Ethan found himself telling the story again and again, to the mayor, to concerned citizens, to a reporter who'd somehow materialized with notebook and pencil. Each telling was exhausting, forcing him to relive moments he'd rather forget. Finally, late into the night, he escaped to a boarding house room Bridger had arranged. He sat on the bed, too tired to even remove his boots, and stared at the wall. A soft knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find Hayes standing in the hallway. Thought you might need this? Hayes said, offering a bottle of whiskey. Ethan took it gratefully. Thanks. Hayes sat in the room's single chair while Ethan took a long pull from the bottle. The whiskey burned, settling his nerves slightly. You did good today, Hayes said. Better than good. Exceptional. Doesn't feel exceptional. Feels like I lost. You saved 6 children who would have died otherwise. That's not losing. Tell that to the 14 I couldn't save. Hayes was quiet for a moment. You know what I learned in the war as a field surgeon? You can't save everyone. Sometimes you have to choose. Sometimes you do everything right, and people still die. And sometimes you do everything wrong, and people still live. The only thing you can control is whether you try. And if trying isn't enough, then at least you tried. At least you stood when others would have walked away. Hayes leaned forward. Those 6 children wouldn't be alive without you. That has to count for something. Ethan took another drink, wanting to believe it, wanting the numbers to balance in some cosmic ledger that made the deaths worth the saves. Get some sleep, Hayes said, standing. Doctor says the children will be recovered enough to talk in the morning. They'll want to thank you properly. After Hayes left, Ethan finally pulled off his boots and lay back on the bed. Sleep came hard, filled with dreams of locked wagons and dying children, and a choice he'd make again despite knowing how it would end. Because Hayes was right. Some things were worth the cost, even when the cost was nearly everything. Morning brought clarity and pain in equal measure. Ethan woke to sunlight streaming through the boarding house window and the immediate awareness of every injury his body had sustained over the past 3 days. His shoulders ached from hauling the sledge. His hands were raw from rope and reins. Bruises he didn't remember getting painted his ribs in shades of purple and yellow. But worse than the physical pain was the weight in his chest, the knowledge of what he'd witnessed, what he'd failed to prevent. He dressed slowly, each movement deliberate, and made his way downstairs. The boarding house dining room was nearly empty, most of the town already about their morning business. The proprietor, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Chen, brought him coffee and eggs without being asked. "Heard what you did," she said quietly. "Heard about those children. The whole town's talking about it." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "My daughter was an orphan," Mrs. Chen continued, "from San Francisco. I took her in when she was 7, raised her as my own. She's grown now, married, living in Denver." She set the coffee cup down firmly. "What you did matters. Don't let anyone tell you different." After she left, Ethan sat with his coffee and tried to reconcile that statement with the faces of the children he'd buried in the desert. It mattered, yes. But to whom? Not to the 14 who'd died. Not to their families, if they had any. The mathematics of salvation were cruel. 6 saved against 14 lost. And somehow, he was supposed to feel good about those numbers. Sheriff Bridger found him there an hour later, looking like he hadn't slept much himself. "Doctor says the children are awake and asking for you," Bridger said, dropping into the chair across from Ethan. "Thought you'd want to know." "How are they?" "Recovering, physically anyway. Mentally." Bridger shook his head. "That's going to take time. Maybe a lifetime. But they're alive to have that time, which is more than they had 2 days ago." They walked together to the doctor's office, a neat building on the edge of town with a painted sign reading Dr. William Foster, physician. Inside, the smell of carbolic acid and laudanum hung in the air, mixing with the morning sunshine that poured through tall windows. The 6 children were arranged in beds along one wall, looking small and fragile against white sheets. But they were clean now, properly fed, their wounds dressed. Dr. Foster, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, moved among them with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Cole," the doctor said, looking up, "your timing is excellent. I've just finished my morning examination. The children are weak, dehydrated, and malnourished, but barring infection or unforeseen complications, they should make full physical recoveries." "And the other kind of recovery?" Ethan asked. Foster's expression sobered. "That's beyond my expertise. What these children experienced, that leaves scars you can't see. They'll need time, patience, and people who care enough to help them heal." Samuel sat up in his bed as Ethan approached, the boy's face breaking into something that wasn't quite a smile but held the same warmth. Emma was in the next bed and Thomas in the one beyond. The others, Claire, a boy named David, and a tiny girl named Ruth who couldn't be more than 4, watched Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "You came," Samuel said. "Said I would." Adults say lots of things. Doesn't always mean they follow through. Ethan pulled up a chair, sitting so he was at eye level with the children. "I'm here, and I'll stay as long as you need me to." Emma reached out from her bed and touched his hand, her fingers thin but steady. "We wanted to thank you, all of us. We talked about it this morning, and we wanted to say it proper." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, we do," Samuel said firmly. "You could have left us. Should have left us, probably. Would have been smarter, safer. But you didn't. You stayed and you fought and you got us here." His voice cracked slightly. "My sister didn't make it, but I did. We did. Because of you." Ethan's throat tightened. "I'm sorry about your sister. About all the others who didn't make it." "We know," Emma said softly. "We know you tried. That's what matters." "Did it?" Ethan wanted to ask. Did trying matter when half the children still died? When bodies were buried in unmarked graves across the desert? But looking at these 6 survivors, at the life still burning in their eyes despite everything they'd endured, he couldn't bring himself to voice those doubts. Sheriff Bridger cleared his throat from the doorway. Mr. Cole, when you have a moment, I need to discuss the legal situation. Ethan squeezed Emma's hand gently and stood. I'll be back, he promised the children. Outside, Bridger led him to a small office in the back of the building. A U.S. Marshal sat waiting there, a hard-faced man with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen everything twice. Ethan Cole? The Marshal asked. That's right. Marshal James Thornton. I've been assigned to this case by the territorial government. Need to get your full statement about what happened. For the next 2 hours, Ethan recounted everything, finding the wagon, the dead children, the confrontation with Mercer, the battle at the relay station. Thornton took notes in precise handwriting, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions. His face remained impassive throughout, giving nothing away. When Ethan finished, Thornton set down his pen and leaned back. You killed 5 men. I did. Self-defense? They drew first. I was protecting children. And you're prepared to testify to that in court? If needed? Thornton nodded slowly. Mercer's already talking. Gave us 23 names in 4 different territories, operations running from California to Kansas. This is bigger than anyone suspected. He paused. You stumbled into the edge of something massive, Mr. Cole. A network that's been operating for years, moving hundreds of children. The scale of it hit Ethan like a physical blow. Hundreds? At least. Maybe more. Orphanages, foundling homes, even some churches, all feeding children into a pipeline that ends in labor camps, brothels, or worse. Mercer was just one operator. There are others. Ethan felt sick. And these people just got away with it? Until now. Thornton's expression hardened. But you've given us a crack in their operation. Mercer knows names, locations, contacts. With his testimony, we can bring down the whole network. Might take years, but we'll do it. What about the children who are already in the system, the ones who've already been sold? We'll find as many as we can. Can't promise we'll get them all, but we'll try. Thornton stood, extending his hand. What you did out there in the desert, that took courage most men don't have. The law recognizes that. You won't face charges for the killings. Consider this a formal statement of justifiable homicide. Ethan shook the marshal's hand, but the absolution felt hollow. Legal justification didn't erase the weight of taking lives, even when those lives belonged to men who deserved killing. After Thornton left, Ethan stood alone in the office, staring at nothing. The enormity of what he'd uncovered threatened to overwhelm him. Hundreds of children stolen and sold like livestock. A network spanning territories operating in plain sight while people looked away. And he'd saved 6 out of hundreds. The thought should have crushed him, but instead it crystallized into something harder, sharper. 6 was better than none. 6 children who would live, who would grow, who would have futures because he'd refused to walk away. That had to mean something. Dr. Foster found him there a few minutes later. Mr. Cole, the children are asking for you again. There's something they want to discuss. Back in the ward, all 6 children were sitting up now, having clearly been conferring among themselves. Samuel acted as spokesman, his young face serious. We've been talking, Samuel said, about what happens next. The sheriff says they're going to find us homes, families who'll take us in. That's right, Ethan confirmed. But we don't know these families. Don't know if they're lying like Mercer did. Don't know if we can trust them. Ethan knelt beside Samuel's bed. I understand your fear, but Sheriff Bridger is a good man. He'll make sure you go to real families, people who actually want children, not... He stopped, unable to finish. Not like what Mercer promised, Emma said quietly. We know. But Samuel's right. We're scared. What do you need? Ethan asked. The children exchanged glances. Then Ruth, the smallest, spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. Could you stay? Just until we know it's safe? Ethan's heart clenched. These children had every reason not to trust adults, not to believe promises or assurances. They'd been betrayed by the worst kind of evil, and now they were being asked to trust again. I'll stay, he said, as long as you need me to. I won't leave until you feel safe. Relief washed across their faces, so palpable Ethan could feel it in the room's atmosphere. Dr. Foster smiled from the doorway, nodding approval. The next week passed in a strange kind of limbo. Ethan took a room at the boarding house and visited the children daily, sometimes sitting for hours while they told him stories about their lives before the orphanage, before Mercer. Samuel's sister Margaret had loved butterflies. Emma's mother had sung her to sleep every night before the fever took her. Thomas had lived with his grandmother until she died, leaving him alone at age 5. These weren't just nameless victims. They were children with histories, with memories, with dreams that had been violently interrupted. Listening to them talk helped Ethan understand what he'd really saved, not just lives, but futures, possibilities, potential. Sheriff Bridger worked tirelessly to find placements for the children. Not just any placements, but carefully vetted families who understood what these children had been through. He brought couples to meet them, one at a time, allowing the children to have a voice in where they went. The first family that came was a rancher and his wife from outside town, unable to have children of their own. They sat awkwardly at first, nervous and eager in equal measure, until young David started asking questions about their horses. By the end of the visit, the boy was animated in a way Ethan hadn't seen before, talking excitedly about learning to ride. "What do you think?" Ethan asked David after the couple left. David considered carefully, showing the caution all the children now carried. "They seem nice. Real nice. The lady has kind eyes. Want to try it? You can always come back if it doesn't work out." David nodded slowly. I think I want to try." A week later, David left with his new family, waving goodbye from their wagon with a smile that made Ethan's chest ache. 1 down, 5 to go. Ruth went next, to a school teacher and her husband who'd lost their own daughter to scarlet fever years before. The woman wept when she first saw Ruth, and Ethan tensed, ready to intervene if needed. But Ruth walked to the woman on her own, studying her face with those solemn eyes, then climbed into her lap. They sat like that for an hour, the woman holding Ruth while the girl finally allowed herself to be a child who needed comfort. Claire found a home with a baker and his wife, drawn by the promise of learning to make bread and the warm, yeasty smell that clung to the couple's clothes. Thomas was adopted by a doctor in a neighboring town, someone Dr. Foster vouched for personally. That left Samuel and Emma. They were the oldest, the hardest to place. Families wanted younger children, easier children, ones who hadn't seen quite so much darkness. But Ethan refused to let them settle for just any home. These two had been through hell and back. They deserved families who understood that, who were prepared for the nightmares and the silences and the hard days ahead. It was Emma who found her match first, with an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, the boarding house proprietor, approached Ethan one evening. "My daughter in Denver," she said. "I told her about the girl, about Emma. My daughter's husband is a lawyer, works with orphan children. They've been trying to have their own, but..." She trailed off. They asked if Emma might consider coming to live with them. Emma met them when they came to Salvation Ridge, a young couple with earnest faces and careful manners. The wife, Catherine, asked Emma about her interests, her fears, what she hoped for in a family. Not promising anything, just listening, really listening. "They live in a city," Emma said to Ethan afterward. "I've never seen a city." Scared? A little, but also excited. Is that wrong? After everything, to be excited? "No," Ethan said firmly. "It's not wrong. It's exactly right. You deserve to be excited about your future." Emma left on a Tuesday morning, hugging Ethan so hard his ribs ached. "I'll write to you," she promised. "I'll tell you everything. I'll look forward to it." And then there was only Samuel. The boy took the departures of the others with stoic acceptance, genuinely happy for them, but increasingly quiet as his solitude grew. Dr. Foster had released him from medical care, and now Samuel spent his days helping around the boarding house, doing odd jobs, staying busy. Ethan found him one afternoon sitting on the boarding house porch, staring at the desert to the south, the direction they'd come from, where everything had started. "Thinking about your sister?" Ethan asked, sitting beside him. Samuel nodded. "She should be here. Should have gotten a family too. It's not fair." "No, it's not. Everyone keeps saying everything happens for a reason, that maybe Margaret's in a better place now. But that's garbage, isn't it? There's no reason. She just died because a bad man did a bad thing." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're right. There's no reason that makes it okay. Sometimes bad things just happen, and we're left to figure out how to keep living after. How do you do it? Samuel asked. Keep living when people you care about die? You carry them with you. Remember them. Let their memory push you to be better, to do better. Your sister loved butterflies, you said. Maybe someday you make sure there's a garden somewhere with flowers that attract butterflies. Maybe you name your own daughter Margaret. Maybe you just stop and watch butterflies when you see them and think of her. Ethan put a hand on the boy's shoulder. The people we lose don't really leave us. Not completely. They change us, shape us. Your sister's still with you, Samuel. She always will be. Samuel leaned against Ethan's side, and they sat in silence while the sun tracked across the sky. That evening, Sheriff Bridger came to the boarding house with news. There's a family, he said, in Tucson, teacher and his wife. They've raised 3 boys of their own, all grown now. They specifically asked for an older child, someone who might need more patience and understanding. What do you know about them? Ethan asked. Tom and Sarah Whitmore. I sent a telegram to the marshal in Tucson, asked him to check them out personally. He says they're solid people, patient, kind, experienced with children who've had hard starts. Tom teaches at the local school. Sarah volunteers with the church orphan committee, actually trying to reform how they handle placements. Ethan studied Bridger's face. You trust this marshal's judgment? With my life. If he says the Whitmores are good people, they're good people. They presented the option to Samuel, who listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and then requested time to think about it. Ethan walked with him through Salvation Ridge, past the shops and houses, while the boy processed. What if they don't like me? Samuel finally asked. What if I'm too much? Too angry or too sad or too difficult? Then they're not the right family, and we keep looking. But Samuel, any family that can't handle difficult emotions isn't a family you want anyway. You've been through trauma. You're going to have hard days. The right family will understand that. The others all found families. Good families, I think. But what if mine doesn't work out? What if I'm the only one who ends up alone? Ethan stopped walking and turned to face the boy. Listen to me. You are not going to end up alone. I promise you that. If this family doesn't work, we find another. If that one doesn't work, we keep looking. And if we can't find the right fit, then... He paused, the words forming before he'd fully thought them through. Then you come with me. Samuel's eyes widened. What? I haul freight, live out of hotels and boarding houses, spend weeks on the road. It's not a great life for a kid, but it's better than being alone. Better than being somewhere you're not wanted. You'd do that? Take me with you? If it came to that, yes. Samuel stared at him for a long moment, then threw his arms around Ethan's waist, holding tight. Ethan returned the embrace, feeling the boy shake with suppressed sobs. It's okay, Ethan murmured. Whatever happens, you're going to be okay. When Samuel pulled back, his eyes were red but determined. I want to meet them, the Whitmores. I want to try. The Whitmores arrived 3 days later, and from the moment they stepped off the stage, Ethan could see Bridger had been right. Tom Whitmore was a tall man with laugh lines around his eyes and ink stains on his fingers. Sarah was smaller, with graying hair and a warm smile that reached her eyes. They didn't rush Samuel, didn't overwhelm him with promises or expectations. They simply sat with him and talked. We don't expect you to call us Ma and Pa right away, Sarah said. Maybe never, if that doesn't feel right. We just want to give you a home, a safe place to figure out who you want to be. We heard what happened to you, Tom added. What you survived. That took incredible strength. We're not going to pretend that didn't happen or try to make you forget. We just want to help you move forward when you're ready. Samuel asked them questions about their sons, about Tucson, about what life would be like. They answered honestly, not painting an unrealistic picture, but not hiding behind false modesty either. After they left to check into their hotel, Samuel turned to Ethan. What do you think? I think they seem genuine, but what matters is what you think. Samuel was quiet for a long time. I think I want to try, but I'm scared. Being scared is okay. Being scared means you're being smart, protecting yourself. Trust has to be earned, especially after what you've been through. Will you write to me? Check on me? Every week, Ethan promised. And if anything feels wrong, if you need help, you tell me immediately. I'll come get you, no questions asked. Samuel nodded, looking both terrified and hopeful. Okay, let's do it. The day Samuel left was harder than Ethan had anticipated. The boy stood on the stage platform with his small bag of belongings, clothes donated by the town, a few books, a carved wooden butterfly that Ethan had commissioned from a local craftsman in memory of Margaret. I don't know how to say goodbye, Samuel admitted, his voice breaking. Then don't say goodbye. Say, see you later, because this isn't the end. We'll see each other again. Samuel hugged him fiercely. You saved my life. All our lives. I won't forget that. Ever. You saved yourself, Samuel. I just gave you the chance. The Whitmores gave Ethan space for the farewell, understanding its importance. When Samuel finally boarded the stage, he pressed his face to the window, waving until the coach disappeared around a bend. Ethan stood on the platform long after the dust had settled, feeling the weight of the past month settle on his shoulders. 6 children, all placed with families, all given second chances, and 14 others buried in the desert, their chances stolen by men who'd seen them as commodities. The mathematics still didn't balance, but maybe they weren't supposed to. That evening, Ethan sat in the boarding house dining room with Sheriff Bridger, Dr. Foster, and Garrett Hayes, who'd ridden in from the relay station. They shared a bottle of whiskey and the comfortable silence of men who'd fought together and survived. Marshal Thornton sent word, Bridger said eventually. They've arrested 17 people in connection with Mercer's network, shut down 4 orphanages that were funneling children into the pipeline, recovered 38 kids from various locations. 38 more than we had a month ago, Hayes said. That's something. It is, Ethan agreed, though the number felt both significant and insufficient. The trial starts in 3 months, Bridger continued, territorial court in Phoenix. They'll want you to testify. I'll be there, Dr. Foster raised his glass. To the survivors, may they find peace. They drank to that, to the children who'd lived and the ones who hadn't, to the battle fought and the war that continued. Later that night, alone in his room, Ethan pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. The first letter went to Samuel in Tucson, keeping his promise. The second went to Emma in Denver. He wrote to each of the children, short notes letting them know he was thinking of them, that he was here if they needed him. Then he wrote a different kind of letter, one he'd been composing in his head for days. It was addressed to the territorial governor, detailing everything he'd seen, everything he'd learned about the trafficking network. He described the conditions in Mercer's wagon, the dead children, the systematic nature of the operation. He demanded reform, stricter oversight of orphanages, better tracking of child placements, real consequences for those who preyed on the vulnerable. He didn't know if the letter would change anything, probably wouldn't, but silence meant complicity, and he'd been silent too many times in his life. The next morning, Ethan prepared to leave Salvation Ridge. His business had been delayed long enough, freight contracts waiting that couldn't wait forever. But this town had changed him. These children had changed him in ways he was still discovering. Mrs. Chen caught him at breakfast. You'll come back? She asked. I expect so. Got letters to answer, promises to keep. Good. She set down a package wrapped in brown paper. For the road. And Mr. Cole? What you did? Finding those children, fighting for them. My daughter heard about it all the way in Denver. People are talking, paying attention. Maybe that attention will lead to change. Maybe, Ethan said, accepting the package. He rode out of Salvation Ridge as the sun climbed over the eastern horizon, heading back toward the freight routes and familiar work. But he took a detour first, riding south toward Dry Basin, toward the place where this had all begun. The wagon was still there, a skeleton of wood and canvas slowly being reclaimed by the desert. The bodies had been removed weeks ago, buried properly in Salvation Ridge's cemetery with markers bearing their names. But the site remained, a testament to what had happened here. Ethan stood in the place where he'd first found them, remembering the sound of children too weak to cry, the smell of death in the enclosed space, the terrible choice he'd faced. He thought about the 14 who'd died and the 6 who'd lived, about the impossible mathematics of salvation, and he realized something fundamental had shifted inside him. For years, he'd convinced himself that keeping his head down, minding his own business, was the smart play. Safer. Simpler. But safety and simplicity came at a cost. The cost of looking away when people suffered, of preserving his own peace while others drowned. He couldn't do that anymore. Wouldn't. Whatever came next in his life, he'd face it with his eyes open, with his conscience engaged. He'd see the suffering around him and decide, consciously, whether to act or pass by. And more often than not, he suspected, he'd act. Because 6 children were alive who shouldn't be, because their futures mattered, because sometimes saving enough was what made a life worth living. Ethan mounted Ash and turned the horse north, toward the freight routes and whatever came next. Behind him, the desert swallowed his tracks, erasing the evidence of his passage. But the marks he'd left on 6 young lives would endure, rippling forward through time in ways he'd never fully know. And that, he thought, was enough. 3 months passed like water through fingers, each day blurring into the next as Ethan returned to the rhythm of freight hauling. He moved cargo from mining camps to rail stations, from trading posts to territorial outposts, the work familiar and demanding in ways that left little room for thought. But the nights were different. In the darkness, lying in boarding house beds or camped under desert stars, the memories came flooding back, children's faces, the weight of small bodies, the sound of Samuel's voice asking why someone had lied. The letters arrived regularly, forwarded through a network of postal stations and friendly innkeepers who knew Ethan's roots. Samuel wrote every 2 weeks without fail, his handwriting improving with each letter, the content evolving from tentative updates to genuine stories about his new life. The Whitmores had enrolled him in school. He was learning mathematics and history. Sarah had started a small garden, and Samuel had planted a section just for butterflies, filling it with milkweed and wildflowers. He still had nightmares sometimes, he admitted in one letter, but Tom would sit with him until they passed, never making him feel ashamed. Emma's letters came from Denver, describing a world so different from the desert that Ethan could barely picture it. Buildings 3 stories tall, streets packed with people, electric lights that turned night into day. Catherine had taken her to the theater, to museums, to places Emma had only read about in books. She was learning to play piano. She'd made friends at school, though she didn't tell them about what had happened. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The other children wrote less frequently, but consistently enough that Ethan could track their progress. David was learning to rope cattle and rode his horse every morning before school. Ruth had started calling her new parents Mama and Papa, though she still slept with the light on. Claire was apprenticing in the bakery, her letters often arriving with the faint smell of cinnamon still clinging to the paper. Thomas was thriving under the doctor's tutelage, already talking about medical school someday. 6 children, 6 different futures, all unfolding because of a choice made in the desert heat. But 14 others had no futures at all, and that weight never fully lifted. The trial began on a Tuesday in October in the territorial courthouse in Phoenix. Ethan arrived the day before, checking into a hotel near the court building, surprised by the size of the crowd already gathering. News of the case had spread throughout the territories and beyond, newspapers running headlines about the Desert Angels and the orphan trade scandal. Reporters had tried to interview Ethan multiple times during his travels, but he declined every request. This wasn't about him. It was about justice for children who'd been treated as merchandise. Marshal Thornton met him in the hotel lobby that evening, looking tired but grimly satisfied. "We've got 17 defendants," he said, spreading papers across a table. "Mercer's the central figure, but we've connected him to orphanage directors, railroad officials, labor contractors, even 2 judges who signed fraudulent adoption papers. The network was more extensive than we initially thought." "How many children total?" Ethan asked. "We've documented cases involving 243 children over the past 6 years. Those are just the ones we can prove. The actual number is probably double that." The magnitude hit Ethan like a physical blow. Nearly 500 children stolen and sold while the world looked away. "The good news," Thornton continued, "is that we've recovered 86 children from various locations. Labor camps, private homes, a few from worse situations. They're being placed with legitimate families, proper oversight this time." "And the ones you haven't recovered?" Thornton's expression darkened. "Some are dead. Others have disappeared into systems we can't penetrate. Mexico, California, back east. We're still looking, but..." He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. "What do you need from me?" Ethan asked. "The truth. Exactly what you saw, what you experienced. The defense is going to argue that Mercer was running a legitimate placement service, that the deaths were tragic accidents but not crimes. Your testimony destroys that narrative. You're the witness who can't be discredited. You had nothing to gain, you saved children at personal risk, and you have no agenda beyond justice." The trial opened to a packed courtroom, every seat filled with journalists, concerned citizens, and people whose lives had been touched by the orphan trade. Ethan sat in the witness gallery, watching as the prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. Documents showing fraudulent contracts, testimony from orphanage workers who'd been pressured to hand over children, financial records proving payments for what were supposed to be free adoptions. And then there were the children themselves. The prosecution had brought 6 of the recovered victims to testify, all older children deemed capable of handling the courtroom environment. One by one, they took the stand and told their stories, promises of families that turned into labor camps, adoptions that were actually sales to brothels, children who'd watched friends die from neglect and abuse. Ethan watched the jury's faces as they listened, saw the horror and disgust register, saw the shift from skepticism to conviction. These weren't abstract crimes, these were real children describing real suffering. Mercer sat at the defense table, his smooth facade still in place, but Ethan could see cracks forming. The man's confidence had eroded over the months in custody, his expensive suit hanging looser on a frame that had lost weight, his eyes carrying a haunted quality that hadn't been there before. Ethan was called to testify on the 3rd day. He took the stand and placed his hand on the Bible for the oath, the irony not lost on him, swearing on a holy book to tell the truth about men who'd preyed on the vulnerable while claiming religious authority. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Elizabeth Kern, approached with a gentle expression. "Mr. Cole, can you describe in your own words what you found in Dry Basin on the afternoon of August 14th? Ethan spoke clearly, laying out the discovery of the wagon, the condition of the children, the bodies of those who'd already died. The courtroom was absolutely silent as he described lifting small corpses from the wagon bed, the heat and smell, the hollow eyes of the survivors who'd stopped hoping for rescue. "And what did you do when you made this discovery?" Kern asked. "I tried to save them. Gave them what water I had, created shade, started moving them toward help." "You could have left. Ridden to the nearest town for assistance. Why didn't you?" Ethan met her eyes. "Because they would have died before I got back. Every minute mattered." Kern walked him through the entire sequence of events, the confrontation with Mercer, the shootout, the desperate march to the relay station, the agonizing decisions about who to help first when resources were limited. Ethan didn't embellish or dramatize. He just told it straight, the way it had happened. "Mr. Cole," Kern said, "in your professional opinion as someone who's spent 15 years traveling these territories, hauling freight in all conditions, could the deaths of those children have been accidental? Could this have been, as the defense suggests, a tragic mishap involving a broken wagon and unfortunate timing?" Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. That wagon was deliberately placed in a location with no water, no shelter, no reason for anyone to pass by. The children were locked inside, no way to escape. And from what the survivors told me, they'd been checked on at least once and deliberately left to die. This wasn't an accident. It was murder." The defense attorney, a slick man named Harrison who wore expensive suits and spoke in practiced tones, tried to shake Ethan's testimony during cross-examination. He suggested Ethan had misunderstood what he'd seen, that the children's statements were unreliable, that the shootout had colored Ethan's perception of events. "Isn't it true, Mr. Cole, that you killed 5 men during this incident?" Harrison asked, his tone suggesting scandal. "I did. And you expect this court to believe that a man capable of such violence is an objective witness? I killed men who were shooting at me and threatening children. I'd do it again under the same circumstances. That doesn't change what I saw in that wagon." "You've become quite the hero in the newspapers, haven't you? The desert angel who saved the orphans. Doesn't that give you a motive to exaggerate what happened, to make yourself look more heroic?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for attention. Didn't want it. I just wanted those children to live. If telling the truth makes me look heroic, That says more about how low the bar is than about me. Harrison tried several more approaches, but Ethan's testimony remained consistent, unshakable. He'd seen what he'd seen, and no amount of legal maneuvering could change that. The prosecution's final witness was Samuel. Ethan hadn't known the boy would testify. The Whitmores had brought him to Phoenix, and as Samuel walked to the stand, Ethan saw how much the boy had changed in 3 months. He stood taller, moved with more confidence. His face had filled out from regular meals, but his eyes still carried the weight of what he'd experienced. Samuel took the oath and sat down, his gaze finding Ethan in the gallery. Ethan nodded encouragingly. Kern approached gently. "Samuel, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the court about your experience with Mr. Mercer. Can you do that?" Samuel nodded. "He came to our orphanage in Redstone, said he worked for families who wanted children, said we'd have real homes, people who'd care about us." His voice was steady, clear. "He showed us papers, official-looking things. The orphanage director believed him. We believed him." "What happened after you left the orphanage?" "We traveled for days. 22 of us in the wagon. At first it was okay. He gave us food and water, let us out to stretch. But then we got to the desert and everything changed. He locked us in, said it was for our safety. Said the families would be there soon." "Did the families come?" "No, nobody came. We waited in the heat, getting sicker. Some of the younger children started dying. My sister Margaret," Samuel's voice cracked. "She died on the 3rd day. She was only 6. Several jury members visibly reacted, one woman wiping her eyes. "Did Mr. Mercer check on you during this time?" "Once. He opened the wagon, looked inside, saw that some of us were dead. Then he closed it again and left." "Did he offer help? Water? Medical attention?" "No, he just looked at us like we were cargo that had spoiled. Then he locked it again." Harrison tried to discredit Samuel during cross-examination, suggesting the boy was confused, that trauma had distorted his memories. But Samuel remained calm, answering each question with the same unwavering consistency. "Isn't it possible," Harrison suggested, "that Mr. Mercer intended to return with help, but was delayed?" Samuel looked directly at Mercer. "Then why did he tell Mr. Cole we were cargo? Why did he try to kill Mr. Cole for saving us? If he meant to help, why did he fight so hard to stop the person who actually did?" Harrison had no answer to that. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The defense called character witnesses for Mercer, people who claimed he was a philanthropist, a man dedicated to helping orphans. But the prosecution systematically demolished each claim with financial records showing payments for children, testimonies from victims, and the undeniable evidence of 14 bodies pulled from a wagon in Dry Basin. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts for Mercer, trafficking in persons, murder, conspiracy, fraud. The other defendants received similarly devastating verdicts, their network of exploitation laid bare and condemned. Mercer's face remained blank as the verdicts were read, but his hands trembled slightly on the table. The judge set sentencing for the following week, but everyone in the courtroom knew what it meant. Mercer would hang. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed Ethan, shouting questions, demanding statements. He pushed through them without comment, finding sanctuary in a quiet restaurant where Marshal Thornton was waiting. "You did well in there," Thornton said, sliding a whiskey across the table. Ethan took it, drinking slowly. "Doesn't feel like victory." "Never does with cases like this. Too much damage already done. But we stopped them. That's something." "What happens to the children you recovered, the 86? "Placement process, same as the ones you saved. We've reformed the system, implemented new oversight. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better." Thornton paused. "You know, you could help with that. The territorial government is setting up a new agency to monitor child placements. They need people with integrity, people who actually care. They asked if you'd be interested." Ethan considered it, turning the glass in his hands. "I'm a freight hauler. Don't know anything about running an agency. You know right from wrong. You know how to stand up when others look away. That's more valuable than administrative experience." Thornton leaned forward. "Think about it. You've got a chance to prevent this from happening again, to be part of the solution." The following week, Ethan attended the sentencing. The judge showed no mercy, handing down death sentences for Mercer and the three other principals, with lengthy prison terms for the rest. As the guards led Mercer away, the man's eyes found Ethan in the gallery. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Ethan saw something in Mercer's expression that might have been regret, or might have been nothing more than fear of the rope waiting in his future. Then the guards pulled him through the door, and he was gone. Samuel was waiting outside the courthouse with the Whitmores. The boy had sat through the sentencing with the same quiet strength he'd shown throughout the trial. "Is it over?" Samuel asked. "It's over," Ethan confirmed. "Good." Samuel took a deep breath, as if releasing something heavy he'd been carrying. "Now we can move forward." Tom Whitmore extended his hand to Ethan. "We're grateful for everything you've done. For Samuel, for all the children. You gave our son a second chance at life. He's a remarkable boy. You're lucky to have him." "We know," Sarah said, her hand on Samuel's shoulder. "We're reminded of that every day." Before they left, Samuel hugged Ethan fiercely. "You'll still write?" he asked. "Every week, promise." "And you'll visit? Tucson's not that far." "I'll visit," Ethan agreed, realizing he meant it. He watched them board the stage back to Tucson, Samuel waving from the window until the coach disappeared around a corner. Then Ethan walked through Phoenix, processing everything that had happened, everything that had changed. He thought about Thornton's offer, about the chance to do more than just react to injustice. He'd spent years hauling freight, keeping his head down, avoiding complications. But that life felt hollow now, insufficient. He'd seen what one person could accomplish when they refused to look away. He'd saved 6 children, helped dismantle a trafficking network, sparked reforms that might protect thousands more. What else could he do if he actually tried? 2 days later, Ethan sent a telegram to Thornton accepting the position. The territorial government created the Office of Child Welfare, and Ethan became its first field inspector. His job was to visit orphanages, monitor placements, investigate complaints, and ensure children weren't being exploited. It meant less time on the freight routes, more time in settlements and towns, but the work felt purposeful in ways hauling cargo never had. He maintained his correspondence with all 6 children, watching through their letters as they grew and thrived. Samuel excelled in school and talked about becoming a teacher like Tom. Emma discovered a talent for writing and had her first essay published in a Denver newspaper. The others found their own paths, shaped by what they'd survived, but not defined by it. 3 years after the trial, Ethan received a letter from Samuel that was different from the others. The boy, now a young man of 14, had started a project at his school, collecting supplies for orphanages and organizing adoptive family networks. He'd recruited other students, enlisted local businesses, created a system that was actually making a difference. The letter included a newspaper clipping about the program, with Samuel's photograph alongside the headline, "Former Orphan Helps Others Find Homes." Ethan stared at that photograph for a long time, seeing the confident young man Samuel had become, the leader emerging from the traumatized child he'd pulled from a wagon in the desert. This was the ripple effect, the way one act of courage multiplied through time. He wrote back immediately, telling Samuel how proud he was, how much the work mattered, and he included his own news. The Office of Child Welfare had expanded, now operating in 4 territories, with plans for more. They'd investigated over 200 orphanages, shut down 17 for abuse or exploitation, and reformed dozens more. Placement protocols had been completely overhauled, with mandatory home visits and regular check-ins. It wasn't perfect, but children were safer now than they'd been before. 5 years after Dry Basin, Ethan returned to the desert. He made the journey deliberately, needing to see the place again to remember where it had all started. The wagon was long gone, reclaimed by scavengers and weather, but the location remained etched in his memory. He stood where the wagon had been and thought about the children. 14 were buried in Salvation Ridges Cemetery, their graves marked with proper headstones funded by donations that had poured in after the trial. 6 were alive and thriving, scattered across the territories, building lives that mattered. The mathematics still didn't balance perfectly. 14 dead against 6 saved would never be an equation that resolved neatly. But Ethan had learned something crucial in the years since. Salvation wasn't about perfect math. It was about doing what you could with what you had, refusing to be paralyzed by what you couldn't change. Those 6 children had grown into remarkable people. Samuel's orphan aid program had helped place over 100 children in the past year alone. Emma was writing articles about child welfare reform, bringing attention to issues that had been ignored for too long. The others were contributing in their own ways, David teaching other children to work with horses, Ruth volunteering at the school where she'd once been a student, Claire providing employment to young people who needed a start, Thomas planning to open a free clinic. 6 children had become 6 agents of change, their impact rippling outward in ways Ethan could never have predicted when he'd stumbled upon that wagon 5 years ago. He pulled an envelope from his pocket, a letter that had arrived the previous week. It was from a woman named Clara, one of the 86 children recovered during the trial. She'd been 11 when they'd found her in a labor camp outside Sacramento. Now she was 16, living with a family in Oregon, and she'd written to thank him. The letter read, "I know you didn't save me directly, but you saved the system. Your testimony, your refusal to look away, created the momentum that led to my rescue. You gave me a chance to have a childhood, to go to school, to dream about a future. I don't know what I want to do with my life yet, but I know I want to help others the way you helped me. You taught me that one person can make a difference. Thank you for that lesson." Ethan folded the letter carefully, returning it to his pocket. This was what mattered. Not the perfect rescue, not saving everyone, but the stubborn refusal to abandon those who needed help. The choice to stand when others walked away. The decision to make a difference within the scope of what was possible. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, Ethan mounted his horse and turned north. There was work waiting, orphanages to inspect, complaints to investigate, children who needed someone to care whether they lived or died. He thought about the choices that had led him here, starting with the moment he'd spotted a wagon where no wagon should be. He could have ridden past. Should have, by any practical measure. It would have been safer, simpler, smarter. But he would have missed everything that came after, the fierce courage of children fighting to survive, the satisfaction of seeing justice served, the privilege of watching 6 young lives unfold into something beautiful. He would have missed the chance to be part of something larger than himself, to contribute to a world slightly better than the one he'd found. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, vast and unforgiving, full of hidden dangers and unexpected grace. Ethan had learned its lessons well, that life was fragile, that evil flourished in indifference, that courage was often just the decision to keep going when everything screamed at you to stop. Somewhere ahead, children needed help. Somewhere in the territories, injustice waited to be confronted, and Ethan would be there, doing what he could, saving who he could, refusing to let the mathematics of loss paralyze him into inaction. Because 6 children had taught him a truth more powerful than any sermon or philosophy, that sometimes saving enough was exactly enough. That the life you changed might change others, creating ripples that spread far beyond your ability to measure or control. As darkness settled over the desert, Ethan made camp near a rocky outcrop, building a small fire against the night's chill. He pulled out his journal, a practice he'd started after the trial, and began writing about the day's observations, the work ahead, the children who still needed advocates. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward into the vast star-filled sky. In that moment, alone in the desert where it had all begun, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years before that August afternoon in Dry Basin. He felt like his life mattered, like the choices he made rippled outward in ways that helped rather than harmed, like he was finally living up to the promise he'd made to himself after the war, to never stand by while people suffered, to always be the man who stepped forward rather than away. 20 children had been locked in a wagon, left to die in the brutal desert heat. 14 had perished, their futures stolen by men who saw them as merchandise. But 6 had survived, 6 had thrived. And from those 6 had come inspiration for hundreds more, creating a cascade of change that was still building momentum. It would never balance perfectly. The dead would always outnumber the saved. But the saved were making sure their survival meant something, that the memory of the loss translated into action that protected others. And in the end, Ethan thought, that was the only mathematics that mattered. Not the perfect equation, but the persistent effort. Not saving everyone, but never stopping trying. Not the heroic moment, but the daily choice to care when caring was difficult. He was a freight hauler who'd found 20 children in a wagon. He was a man who'd killed to protect the innocent. He was an inspector working to prevent the next tragedy. He was a friend to 6 remarkable young people whose lives he'd touched and who'd touched his in return. Most importantly, he was someone who'd chosen to act when action mattered most. The fire burned low as night deepened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new children who needed help, new injustices to confront. But tonight, Ethan allowed himself to feel satisfaction for what had been accomplished, gratitude for the chance to have made a difference, and hope for all the futures that had been salvaged from the desert's merciless heat. 6 children had survived, and their survival had changed everything. That, Ethan thought as sleep finally claimed him, was enough.